One of the major cornerstone teachings of the Megzhon Cabal is the subject of ego and shadow. Those who joined the Cabal after 2015 don't know that Somnus Dreadwood actually stole these teachings from Peter Aziz, someone he had appointed as a master, or what would be considered an imperator today. However, what is taught in the Cabal now on the subject of ego and shadow is so corrupted, so distorted from its original form, I was flabbergasted when I heard Somnus and Razrith speak on it in their videos. So I interviewed the men who actually wrote the original material on the subject.
There's a lot that's being said regarding ego and shadow in Somnus' system.
That was one of the things I taught. I was the one who brought up the whole subject and wrote all about it within that Cabal. I then withdrew and I told them, you can't use this because you're an ego, you're not doing the work. I mean, what I put was very simple to understand the interplay of the ego and shadow, how the shadow always tells the truth and the ego always lies. And most people listen to the ego. And the big mistake they all make is they think the shadow is all your darkness. No, the shadow is what you deny about yourself. If you deny your love, that comes back and bites you in the ass. Whatever you deny will come out from the outside. It's not just what's generally judged in the world as bad. It's like whatever you deny. And so when people think they're embracing the shadows because of the dark side, no, there's still a lot other things they're not embracing. And that's the shadow. And quite often it's the ego which tells them this is better than that, and therefore this is right and this is wrong, and gives them the excuse not to embrace the shadow. All these people running around with a big ego trip trying to be above everybody else and good about to me, while not embracing many aspects of the self they didn't want to look at. They were totally in that trap of ego, not dealing with shadow.
And these ego and shadow teachings are teachings of non-dualism.
Yeah, so basically the point I make is that once you realize we're all one with the whole universe, absolute everything is part of your power. The same divine power is in absolute everything. Therefore, one thing can't be better than another because they're all divinity expressing itself in a different way, exploring a different expression of itself. Now, once we say this is better than that, we're saying this is divine, that isn't. We're shoving a big piece of reality away, and they're all parts of our power we're pushing away. So whenever we're caught in duality, that's already denying half of reality. But it gets worse when people make so many judgments about you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. There's many more aspects of themselves that deny. They're getting smaller and smaller all the time. So duality is like the starting point, but then it gets worse. When they got to this point, and not only is he saying this is the dark path, but you can't follow this and this and this, you can only do it my way, that's really shrunk the possibilities. And there's so much out there that could teach you something that you don't even look at. Mm-hmm. All the time, the ego is saying, this is better than that, therefore it gives the excuse not to become whole. This is what they're doing. I'm the greatest, everything else is wrong, you can't do that. Or trying to say everybody has to bow down before me. You're ego. It's obvious when you look at it. And when you're in the ego, you're not embracing your shadow. We always have to look at the two. They're two always chatting away there, and you can listen to one or the other. The shadow always tells the truth, that's what it's there for. It tries to bring you everything you've denied. The ego makes the excuse not to look at it. The ego always lies. Yet they all listen to the egos, not the shadows.
Somnus stole the teachings, twisted and corrupted them into something very different than what the original teachings were. Marcus continued this until the teachings of ego and shadow became nearly unrecognizable from the original teachings concerning non-duality.
And your sacrifices are going to be made not just in blood, but in time, abandoning mundane hobbies and pursuits in order to dedicate yourself to communing with spirits, studying, testing your ritual work, balancing your ego, your shadow, and your spirit all together.
I want to mention the importance of one's shadow as well, as it controls emotional and certain mental states, as well as honing the ego. It's important to atrophy as well, as mastering this is a definite to assist in ego control, leaking one's mastery over the death essence and underworld reflection. And what I mean by this is that, with the lore of vampiric and undead entities not having shadows or reflection, this is where this come from. They have it, but they become masters of it. So much so it's interwoven into their vessels. But most of them are skilled enough to make them appear, because back then you have people, showing mirrors and reflective surfaces to hunters, to see if you were human or not. And mirror and reflective surfaces are seen as gateways to the underworld or spirit world, which is previously why practitioners were burned and their ashes cast into the oceans, which is why we don't believe in cremation, as I stated before, and why Mayor Jiraiya employs uses of phylacteries, one of the many reasons. But yes, the shade aspect is important. And at the risk of this being completely misinterpreted, by some fool, if you've seen the movie Who We Do in the Shadows, there's a scene where this vampire, Vladislav, gets sort of mentally destabilized due to the knowledge that an enemy will be attending a certain gathering, and it's pissed him off beyond all belief, so he begins to rot. He's no longer in control of his shade, so death is permeating from him, and this lore originates from this because they lose control of it, so their greatest strength can become a weakness, and some are strong enough to where they don't care and will let it permeate and emanate from them anyway, and there are many other examples from this in myth and lore, but that's where it originated from. I thought a few of you would find that fascinating. Your ego can literally drain you and make you lose control of your shadow aspect. Also, I'm not making a full video about Umbra. That's going to be my brother Somnus. I brought this up because fallacy, brought it up, and misconception by this fucking fool.
This is a terrible distortion of what Peter taught. This is why he withdrew the teachings. Eric was perverting them, badly. On top of that, he saw an opportunity to use these teachings to control others, always accusing other people of egotistical motives. And after Peter chose to leave, Eric took his teachings, gave it an even worse distorted spin, mixed it with fantasy, and presented it as his own. He did this so many times with different people. This is where Eric and Marcus missed the ego and shadow work completely. The shadow work that Peter talks about has nothing to do with Eric's Towers of Umbra or Tower of Atrophy. There is no sort of shadow sorcery to ego and shadow work, despite the fact that they both use the word shadow. Peter taught how to use shamanic journeying to touch on self-realization, also known as enlightenment, which is not in the realm of sorcery. If you try to approach enlightenment using the tools of sorcery, you're going to fall into delusion. The shadow is that still small voice within you that accurately reflects reality, but another part of the self chooses to turn away. And this act of turning away leaves this truth meter, or rather truth reflector, in a shroud of mystery. Terms like ego and shadow are just reference points, so we can have a conversation about it. These are not terms for different entities that you have a symbiotic relationship with you or something like that. You cannot treat ego and shadow as if they are spirits you have to manage. Now, it might appear as though Peter is saying that ego and shadow are separate beings, but Peter is coming from a vantage point of non-dualism. This is crucial to understand. It's like that Zen koan. They are fingers pointing to the moon, not the moon itself. True ego and shadow work has very little to do with sorcery, but it does have the power to augment all sorceries. Now, my own self-realization mostly came through satsangs on something closer to Advaita Vedanta, a very direct teaching method. I know what Peter is driving at, so let me explain it in a different way. Ego is mind. Mind is ego. They are the same. It is the sense of self. People tend to think of ego as pride, but that's only one facet. Someone who is depressed is constantly self-referencing. This is another facet of ego. Ego and shadow are major facets of the mind, but the mind is not the same as consciousness. Consciousness animates mind. Mind is a tool used by consciousness for reflection. But for most people, the mind does not act as a good mirror. The mirror is warped and dirty. The mind perceives the world in a distorted way, going through conditioning and filters. This distorted perception is ego. However, you still have an internal truth mirror, that small voice in the back of your head, or that feeling down in the gut. This accurately reflects reality while another part of the self turns away. The act of turning away leaves this truth mirror in a shroud of mystery. This shrouded truth mirror is the shadow. And it is only shrouded because we make it shrouded. Some things are painful to acknowledge. Reality often presents us with situations we would rather not deal with, so we try to filter it out, or pretend it's not there, or reinterpret a situation to be different than it is. These distortions and filters are ego. The ego is the shroud around the truth mirror. As long as you are alive, there will always be a measure of truth in you, and the shadow self will reflect that truth accurately. It's quite mechanical when you really see it. What minds really want in the end, though, is unity. People don't want to be broken. People don't want to be divided against themselves. But for most people, the desire for wholeness manifests as this sort of abstract feeling that something is not quite right. The truth has a way of expressing itself, even in a small way, through the ego. Eventually, you become aware just how needed wholeness is. You do this by embracing whatever it is that you've been turning away from. Not forcefully, but through the act of relaxing and embracing that which is uncomfortable to you, allowing it to be experienced fully without resistance. Not, oh, I'm going to courageously conquer this pain. No. It's a vulnerable act of surrender. By embracing what you instinctively want to push away, the truth mirror becomes less distorted, and you'll perceive the world more closely to how it actually is, rather than how you think it should be. Should and should not is inherently disconnected from what is. The moment you start thinking should or shouldn't, you're already in the mental narrative, the ego. This vulnerable act of surrender to whatever the shadow or truth mirror presents is precisely why most sorcerers will not touch it. Sorcerers want control, and this is going in the opposite direction. But if you do this, all your sorceries across the board will naturally be augmented as a result. One, because all that energy that was being used to maintain the illusion is now being directed elsewhere. And two, you have a more accurate tool to gauge what you are doing. Useful, huh? Embracing the shadow self essentially cleans up the mirror that is the mind. Basically, this means that the shadow loses its shroud due to the thinning of the ego, and you essentially operate almost exclusively from shadow. You turn into a walking beacon of truth. Ego is still there, but it's like a perfume. You know when someone wears too much perfume and it's overbearing? That's how most egos are. By simply dialing that back, the ego becomes pleasant to be around. And when this happens, something else comes online. You begin to function from a kind of intuitive place beyond mind. Not the kind of intuition that is hazy. It's a lot more clear than that. When the mind drops its conditioning and filters, it stops needlessly intruding. Then pure, undistorted consciousness of your being, the true self, projects through you, and you act according to what's obvious. This is difficult for the mind to grasp, that actions can be taken and decisions made without the mind interfering. It's pure consciousness flowing through you unimpeded. And you don't become a mindless automaton either. That's a fear projected by the mind because it cannot see that which is beyond itself. When you're operating almost entirely from shadow, it's like being in a trance all the time, only being completely mentally alert as well, with all your mental faculties still at your disposal. and more of your own self-expression effortlessly comes to the surface. In fact, as a result of doing this, you become more unique. More of your natural character shines through because you stop trying to emulate others. You stop trying to be like those you admire and actually be the true you, the true self. Imagine seeing and understanding as the gods do. That's what this is. And what comes with this is how to most effectively use the mind, as it's a tool for interacting with this tangible world, like how to fix a car or build a house. But it's the wrong tool for the job when it comes to self-investigation, or much of anything really regarding spirit. The mind is a wonderful tool, but it's no place to get lost in. And it is a terrible thing for the ego to become enlightened. An ego that tries to become enlightened goes into abstraction. It goes through the motions of what it thinks enlightenment is, pretending to be something it is not. Enlightenment is more of a motion that happens through you rather than something you know in your head. Most sorcerers are not prepared for this. Do not seek enlightenment through sorcery. It's no different than asking a car mechanic for swimming lessons. You're asking the wrong specialist. Now, if you do both sorcery and enlightenment, but that's even rarer. There's more to this subject, a lot more. But these are basics that clear up some of the misunderstandings about ego and shadow. If you want book recommendations, immediately what comes to mind is I Am That by Nisargadatta Maharaj and Be As You Are by Ramana Maharshi. For audio talks, there are several good ones, but my favorite is Adyashanti. The way he talks just makes a lot of sense to me. The world opens up for those that dive in, but for those that aren't ready for it, won't understand it.